just want to say a huge welcome, Kale, to the Kiwi Landing Pad webinar. For those of you listening, Kale's a good friend of mine. We go back to the roots in Dunedin, where Kale still lives. And ironically, I am right now, whereas Kale is up in Auckland. We swapped locations, but Kale's just a phenomenal person with a never-ending pursuit for learning, and particularly in the marketing field. Kale, you've both some pretty incredible things from when you started Central Fitness and you ramped that up to what like 200K recurring revenue in what, like
14 days, yeah.
14 days, right? Like crazy cool. And then more recently, just with the successes you've had with K&J Growth and taking 3 businesses to 7 figures, helping build out the initial marketing campaign with TikTok, which I'm sure many of our audience are now on. I know I'm definitely on that, and my partner spends far too much time on it. Between that and Rugby Bricks, there's just so much amazing stuff that you're involved in. So I'm super pumped, genuinely pumped to have you on this webinar to talk about that. And also framing that up as well. We talked about this before, but being able to kind of talk about the higher level stuff, but also getting into the nitty gritty detail of how that happens. But having said that, Kale, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, bro. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm pretty stoked in terms of actually getting to jump on with you, because we always have great chats, and I guess just now we've got an audience to share it with too.
Absolutely. So, Kale, where are you zooming in from?
So I'm sitting in the Ice House. I've set me up with a private room in here, and I'm meeting with the new CEO and the head of growth after this. But yeah, I had just flown out, funny, from Dunedin, hit Wellington yesterday, visited the NZRU, and I'm here, and I got Microsoft tomorrow. Cool,
awesome. And I'm zooming in from Innovate HQ down in Dunedin. But yeah, super ironic that like for this webinar we literally like came in and out of Dunedin.
Switched.
That's very cool. And just as we kick into the content, just making sure everyone can hear and see Kale and myself okay, if you let us know in the chat, now that we've kind of refreshed it. And kind of in this awesome, thank you, Jeff. And just like, as mentioned before, we're going to unpack a lot of things in this webinar, but one of the key trends that you'll see is the ability to try things and the ability to just like give things a nudge and always be in pursuit of improving. And that's the reason for the switch. So many of you that will be tuning in today listen to join us for a lot of the Kiwi Landing Pad webinars. And if you are one of those folk, you'll be familiar that we normally do it through Crowdcast. But in the spirit of adapting, we're doing some through Zoom. We've identified that the video quality is a bit sharper, and we're really wanting to make sure we could give the best experience for you guys as possible. And also for us, it gives the ability that we can edit this after the fact and help get the stuff that we talk about out there to the community and help as much as possible. So thank you for your patience, everyone listening, for the little technical challenges that we overcame, which is cool. So cool, okay, so kicking things off, Kale, do you want to talk a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I'll jump in, and for the budding entrepreneurs and this sort of thing, for me, the path to sort of self-employment and entrepreneurship started roughly in 2016. I had finished a role at Education Perfect, which is a relatively large education tech software company that's grown and lives in Dunedin. Finished up there, went into a job with what is called, I'm even trying to forget the name of the company, Entertainment Book. Went into a managerial role there and was promptly let go before my 90-day trial was up for basically not being as good as I could be, a little bit of arrogance and too much what I was doing. And for me, largely my own fault. At that point, I sort of made a pivot lifestyle-wise. I was like, I know I'm good at what I can do in terms of marketing, but I was carrying way too much arrogance. And so had my first large, really life failure at that point. And so from there, went and thought, okay, cool. Look, I'm a personal trainer. My background's there. I've got my background's also in science. So I went to uni, did my BSc, and my next steps from there, I was like, well, love what I do, pretty good. I'll open a gym. Opened a gym in Cromwell. So for those of you from Central Otago or anyone there, so it's called Central Fitness. We've now got 3 of those throughout the country. We launched that in a pretty methodical way, and that led us to sort of sign up a couple hundred members in 14 days, got them all to prepay for their memberships. And so that got me a bit of press globally, ended up in like Inc. magazine, had a mention in Forbes, ended up on some cool sites. and then end up getting recruited to do some work for Snap Fitness in terms of the way that they open. And then my marketing was getting out there, went and bid in a campaign against another guy. His name was John. I lost half the campaign to him in terms of the bid for this client called University of Delaware, and that's how the company K&J Growth started. So I've got the marketing agency at that point now, and so launched that. I now have another company called Rugby Bricks, which is an e-commerce brand, and I've just started another company here in New Zealand called BrightFire, which is focusing on basically giving really, really detailed information to people who are starting out a business or people who have been in business for a while, increasing their digital literacy, but giving them very, very hands-on tools and articles that literally here's how to build sales from scratch, or learn how to do some of the digital side of that and sell better.
That's cool. And I guess that's definitely like one of the, I guess, the challenges that I experienced when I was getting into digital marketing. I started an e-commerce site as a side hustle, and that kind of led me down a cool pathway where I've still got the marketing agency now. But just getting into the nitty gritty, right? I've actually been able to dive in and do things. It can feel quite overwhelming. So like when there's so many things coming at you that's super high level, it's like, where do you even start? So that's a really cool initiative, and that's really awesome. So when you opened Central Fitness, what did you have in mind? Like, were you like what you achieved is phenomenal. What were you aiming for?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the whole part of how we even started. So the first, obviously, maybe growth campaign, or what we did, what would be called and consider growth hacking, and the marketing agency K&J Growth Hackers is named after what is called, I guess, and now is MVP marketing, which is minimum viable product marketing. For me, and for my business partners at the time, we didn't want to spend 80K to 100K fitting out and kitting out a gym with no one to sign up. You know what I mean? And so the way that we want to do that is it's initially, hey, we've got this idea, let's test and spend a couple $100 to figure out whether or not we can sign up people in a space of 2 weeks and get these people to help us build the product. And however many signups, if we get enough to cover the startup costs, which we figured were 50K, then we will launch. And so from there, that whole piece of we were aiming basically to cover the startup costs, and we shot well and above that. And so the whole part for that story was, what we initially did is we were like, okay, let's start by making what a gym might be, and we negotiated with a landlord. So we were like, okay, cool, where's the best space to get foot traffic into a gym? There's a Sterling Sports that had been emptied out, and it was a bare concrete pad. And we're like, all right, let's choose this for the venue. Let's count how many people walk past in a day. So that was our first part of the marketing. The second part was then we were like, okay, how can we kit this out to say that we're going to get people in here to come look at what the space that we might be building? So we chatted with the landlord, said, hey, we're going to potentially rent this off you for the next 3 years. Can you give us the space for us for 2 weeks? We're going to try and put a gym in here. So what we did is set up an event for the first weekend, put down literally A3 and A4 pieces of paper, and then went out and reached out to people who were, I guess, fitness influencers within Cromwell, head of the president of the bike club, captain of the rugby club, the owner of the swimming pool, the new CrossFit box gym that was literally just someone's backyard. And so we reached out to all these people and we said, hey, we're going to host this event. We're looking for this many number of people to sign up. Can you share this every night on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday about the event we're hosting? We did that. We got literally on the first weekend, 118 people to come through, sign up saying, look, yep, if the gym looks like this is what they're doing. But what they did is they would write up what they wanted to see in the gym in the future. So we got these A3 and A4 pieces of paper that we wanted to stick around the gym that were pieces of equipment. And then people would go through and mark what they liked and what they didn't like. And then they would also, we put up a chalkboard to go through and say, write up what you want to see and we'll make it. And then the last part is the best thing about this whole part is that we get them to put their name and then sign it on the chalkboard. So when all their friends and family came in, they were like, oh, cool, Jenny signed up, I can't wait. And so that was pretty much the very beginning of what the MVP growth hack was. And the whole goal was let's cover the startup costs. And if we think we've got enough people to sign up, then let's launch the business.
It sounds like you really did bring the community on that journey with you, rather than the typical kind of build it and they will come and then just hope that they like it. It sounds, you must have had so much buy-in from the people and the folk that were actually going to use this in the first place.
Yeah, the way I think about marketing is that the best form of it is word of mouth, right? And so the key part is that if you were to tell me after this, or say, hey, bro, love this book, this is really, really great, go read it, I'm going to go buy that book as soon as I can. The key piece for what we did and how we tried to pivot to make that happen is we were like, okay, who are the people who have the biggest sway over the fitness community in Cromwell, right? And so we identified each of those people and we're like, let's leverage their word of mouth and then get them all to jump on social media at Monday at 6 p.m. in New Zealand time, because that was the biggest peak hour. And we'd have 10 people literally on their Facebook post be like, hey, Central Fitness is a potential gym that might be opening up here. They're holding an event here. Loved it. Talked to Johnny, Kale, and Alex. This is the launch. This is what they're doing. And we did that Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? And so all we were doing is just, one, getting the community on board, which is a really big, big piece, but we were just getting them to share their word of mouth. And their word of mouth obviously correlates to people just coming in. And then we also got people to build our product too, because the generic gym that was there, we had one competitor and they just had normal equipment. We wanted to build out equipment and classes that people wanted, but also they were just willing to pay for. So they gave us our product roadmap and we went from there.
Yeah, cool. Which means that like every dollar that you then invest into equipment or your product, is validated that people are going to use it, or that the demand is there. That's cool, man. I love it. It's a very unique story, and it's almost kind of like from a startup lens, and for the folk listening, I know as much as possible they try to engage their consumers or their target audience to kind of engage, get their feedback, bring them on that journey. So hearing that, like a very tangible way of what that looks like, and I know that there'll be gems that people have taken away from that. That's super cool. Well, there's a long list of the sort of stuff that you've done, right? Like now going out with like TikTok and Rugby Bricks, and I know you do work with Monster Energy, and you've done stuff with BNZ. You've done all sorts of really cool stuff. So that's, I guess, framing that. If there's one word that I'd say for people listening to you as you talk about this, would be credibility. Like you've been there, you've done that, you've had some remarkable results. That's super cool. Jumping into, actually first, just for everyone that's listening, if you've got any questions, please do feel free in the Q&A section, fire them away, and we'll do our best to go through and answer them as we go, or circle back around to them. So we had a question before from George Gray, which was whether this is going to be recorded after the fact. Yes, it will, and we'll make sure we get the link out to you guys. And we're also going to edit this down to we'll have the long version as well as like a highlights video for you too. So yes, and keep those questions coming. Kale, next question would be, so the digital, we kind of touched on this before, but like the digital world is overwhelming, right? How do you approach your learning for those the folk that are, they'll be deep into the trenches of what they're doing, and obviously digital marketing is a way to get it out there, but that's not necessarily their field of expertise. And you kind of jump in and it's just like, there's so much stuff happening. How did you approach it, and how do you recommend the community approaching learning in such an overwhelming world?
Yeah, so the key piece out of this is that there's just an overflow of information, right? Literally from top down leadership type stuff, which is very high level, through to even the nitty gritty stuff where like you're not sure where to start, or you'll see the highlight reel of someone else's company and you want to try that on your own. The key piece that I talk about when I'm trying to tell people how to start or launch or test your business is give an idea or a marketing strategy 3 weeks worth of testing from, I know this is base A and I have a set point. So understand initially, if I'm making $100 a week from my marketing, and then I want to introduce a new marketing tool, which might be Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Quora, whatever it is, the tool that you want to use, have 3 weeks of saying, look, these are the tools, outcomes, and things I really want to test and work on, and then apply that, and then measure what you do, and don't add anything else, because the key thing that most people will do is they'll try everything. And then the same thing with if you're in business, if everybody's your customer, no one's your customer, right? So the same thing with all these digital tools is that if you're going to try everything and you're doing this crappy attempt of doing everything all at once, your key base idea is have a starting point, have a finishing point, and then test the effectiveness of what you're applying and putting in.
That makes sense. And I imagine like for people that do try everything, one of the things that could also happen is when they get subpar results because they haven't been able to really dive into it, the conclusion that they can also take away is that it doesn't work. But
yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's
It's
so.
it's the framework that people apply to their testing, right? Because everyone's like, oh, you should do X or you should try this. And to be honest, like I could tell you the best, maybe what the best tool in ROI or cheapest ad spend is right now. That may not be the best one for your business, right? So the framework for which you have to apply these tools is, do I have a clear starting point in terms of this literally just sits here and I know exactly what my revenue is, to 3 weeks from now, I've added this new marketing channel and I've seen this result. And as you stack those up over, if you try 5 new channels, you've got 15 weeks, you've then got a really good idea. It's like, okay, cool. The clearest ROI was maybe in that week 3 to 6 when I tried LinkedIn marketing. And then you can be like, cool, that's where we really want to double down or triple down our efforts. And you'll be able to see each of those channels and tools and layer which ones work on top of them.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And I guess also just holding in mind like the different business models, right? Like for LinkedIn, it's B2B. So obviously,
yeah, you can do definitely, yeah. And to an extent, you can go B2B, but you can also B2C it pretty easily too.
Okay, so and then when you're taking this approach and you're testing different things, so you reckon kind of how long would you stay on one thing before you start moving on? I know you might have 3 to 6 weeks before like testing in general, but
yeah,
micro testing, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll go into a little bit of the details, right? So the first part is if you're going to do anything around digital marketing, the first part is set up Google Analytics, which is the backend tool for tracking how all website traffic gets to you, right? And that's the first part. So making sure that at least you understand what your base levels are for at least a week, right? You understand if that people are coming to your website for, a week, you've got traffic, you can see where it's come from, and you have that first starting point. So start there. And then the second part is give yourself 2 weeks with the new tool of this is the marketing strategy and channel that I want to use, and then layer that on top.
Gotcha. So essentially like when you put in your tools of like Google Analytics or Facebook Pixel, it's not collecting data retrospectively, right? It only starts collecting data from the time that you've actually installed it. So the first step is actually get that going, right?
And then understand what your baseline is.
Right. And then at least that 1 week, so that way you can actually, because otherwise like you could, if you put, I guess what you're saying as well is like if you start getting all your analytics hooked up so you can record all your data and you immediately start testing things, it's hard to actually compare what was working versus like it could have actually been a spike and you're like, oh, it's flat, but it's could have actually.
Exactly, right. And it's the signal versus the noise on that sort of stuff. So for the most part, and it's the same thing whether say as a personal trainer or as most people in goals, like when they start, they're not really sure of their baseline. And so if you don't know what your baseline is, it's really hard to measure improvement or like whether or not you're going backwards. So the key thing is like, make sure you've got a good understanding of what your like weekly traffic is at least before you add in these tools. And so there's a heap of great tutorials out there. Just Google how to install Google Analytics for those who aren't that tech savvy to apply it. But that's the beginning, is that you need to have a good base of understanding what that looks like and then filter out where which sources came from and how to tag that.
And I'd totally echo that from like a learning perspective when you're trying to do this. I think the challenge is actually knowing the question to ask. And you kind of almost like have this broad understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. And as you start punching that into Google, you start getting closer to the right way of framing it. And as soon as you get the right punchy line of like, for example, it could be how to install Google Analytics tag on Squarespace. That's a super specific question. And when you've narrowed into that, that's where like punch it, Google or even YouTube on times too as well. I find quite good just for like boasting through and skipping to the content that you need. But what are your thoughts on like different courses and things like that for kind of upskilling or increasing the speed of learning?
Yeah, so that at the moment, the piece that like I've been talking about, and with COVID and to an extent, I mean, New Zealand's becoming a bit of an exception now that we can go back to our work, but still the most part of our social lives is that we're still relatively stunted compared to where we were. So there's a heap of opportunity right now in terms of learning or your own personal development. The best place for most of all this for education that's super, super cheap is Udemy. You can get literally a world-class knowledge from going through and picking a course. So there's 2 that I recommend. The first one's like a digital marketing basics one. And then if you're getting into any specific for channels, like if you're literally trying to figure out what channel you want to use, there's a great one by Isaac Rudinsky on Google Analytics and Google AdWords. And then I'll drop the other two, the LinkedIn ones, when I've got this afterwards. But any of those courses here, there's the 2020 Digital Marketing Basics, which you can cover through and you'll get a really, really great overview. And then the other part is like, there's some great specific channel ones, but you can pick up a $20 course and become close to what most digital marketing experts say they are in the space of, the time frame it takes for you to complete that course. So,
and yeah, that makes sense. I've just dropped Udemy in the link into the chat as well. And I guess on that piece as well, like for $20 for a course, and by the way, this isn't Kale's course, so we're not trying to push Kale's course towards.
I don't have any courses on Udemy, by the way.
Yeah, we're saying this 100%, just trying to like help people upskill. I guess the trade-off, right, is you can learn all of this stuff on your own for free, but you also have to factor in time, right? Like if you're going to learn this in the space of, how long are these that course particular, Cal?
The piece of the digital marketing course, that could take you up to 6 weeks if you were to go through and do it properly and thoroughly.
If you do that thoroughly, say you do it in 6 weeks to the point that you're really good and you're adding a lot of value wherever you put in your energy. If you don't use something like that, you might it might take you 12 weeks or 10 weeks or 20 weeks, just depends, I guess, on your how much you're learning. But you can get there, but then you have to weigh it up of kind of like, is 4 weeks or 6 weeks or however extra long you add on to the end, what would I rather? $20 or 6 weeks of being really good at now what I can do? Would you say that's kind of the frame of mind to look at it? And some people, they might go one way and there's not a right or wrong answer, but you have to look at your situation and say, do I want to increase it quicker or pay?
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll jump into a share screen and just show people how I track my time and then link this to an ROI.
I'm tracking, I love it.
Yeah, cool. What I'll do here, and just let me know once you can see it.
Yep.
Cool. So what everyone here and what I'm doing is, again, it comes back to that idea of a baseline. If I don't know how I'm spending my time day to day, I don't know how to hire. I don't know whether to understand whether my learning is worth it or whether or not it's acquiring a new skill. So what you can see here is there's some really key pivotal stuff for me. This is Monday. I spent 5 hours and 55 minutes. And right now you can see here is that I'm jumping on with what I would consider K&J marketing for jumping on with KLP, right? Because I'm talking about my businesses and going down that road. The way I do this is I track my time for, one, the company I'm working on. 2, I look at the type of people I'm chatting with. So I write down exactly the thing that I'm doing at the time. And then 3, I'll look at, if I was to hire somebody else to do these tasks, how much would that cost me? And so this is how I weigh up my learning in terms of, okay, for me to hire a great digital marketer, it might cost me $100 an hour. Am I willing to spend the next, if I think it's going to take me 18 hours to maybe go through a course, am I willing to spend $1,800 on hiring someone else to implement this for me versus the key part of me learning this and then possibly having that knowledge and having that be exponential later. So the key pieces here is that, like, if you don't have a great starting point of tracking your time, you can't then put this to an ROI, because for me, the tasks that I'm working on, they're only Kale up tasks, right? So I'm the only person who's catching up with Dane. I'm the one who's reviewing his content. Like, I can't give those to other people. This one I probably could, and I could outsource that. But I would then have to understand it's going to cost me maybe $100 an hour to get a great copywriter to do that. And so the key bit when I'm looking at this and getting people to do that and have these conversations is that tool, by the way, was Toggle, toggle.com. You can just do it to track and start your things. But to get an understanding is, am I going to spend money on learning this myself and spend the time versus hiring somebody else to do it? And that's how you measure your day, is that, will I get a better ROI from hiring someone else versus tracking and doing those things myself?
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess for people that are feeling overwhelmed, like, well, I've already got so much going on, how am I going to squeeze out time to start absorbing this course or like get involved in digital marketing? Like, I know this personally myself, like as soon as you start time tracking, you quickly discover kind of like gaps or areas that you can tighten things up. And you like I actually brought more time into my day. Like, I have an extra 3 hours or whatever. And then then you can dedicate those 3 hours and then you can start kind of mapping it out. So it's like, I really like that. So from a fundamental piece, you actually you end up protecting space to do the things that are most important, that are going to drive you forward. And as you said, kind of like that exponential, like, because if you're also learning stuff yourself too, you're going to be in a better position that even if you build a team around you, you're going to be in a better position to help them and guide them, know what's happening, and rather than kind of abdicating. Like it's good to be in a position of both, eh?
Yeah, and this is the key piece now, right? Is that for me to go out and learn all the logistics of like supply chain and go pick up what would be like lean manufacturing, that would be a pretty terrible use of my time as opposed to me outsourcing that, because I'm not going to influence the production of a product like for us for Rugby Bricks, right? I could learn a lot of supply chain stuff, but I'm better off probably hiring someone else so I can focus on the key pieces of relationships that are going to create a better ROI. The best thing about upskilling and learning though, and this is it, is I think there's core fundamentals that you have to learn if you're going to be a business owner at any stage. And the first one's personal tracking of your time. Almost all of us are guilty of just wasting a shitload of time, me included. Is that like the reason I time track is because I'll be like, oh man, I worked really hard today. And I look at my thing and I'm like, I spent 2.5 hours. I'm like, ooh. You know what I mean? Like there's a big gap between like actually thinking you've worked and then knowing you've worked. And then you look back and you're like, shit, I wasted all this time on these things. So that's the first part of like understanding your time is the part that you can't trade back, but it's going to create a better ROI if you're good at tracking that. The other piece is that you need to understand core marketing, you need to understand core product development, and then you need to understand sales, I think. And those three things that's usually those spaces you want to be in. And if you can get into the weeds of having a good base understanding of each of those, you can then hire appropriately to bring people in.
That makes a lot of sense. We've got a couple of questions, Kale. We've got a question from Jeff Hart. Thank you for your question, Jeff. So it is, as an entrepreneur and before you take your ideas to market, how much time in thinking or researching towards the frameworks do you do before you act?
Almost immediately. So for me, the key part is I'll have an idea for a business or a new, say I'm going to go for a new product. I'll literally, there's two ways to do this. Actually, there's a ton of ways to do this, but I'll walk through the easiest one first is I will post that idea and say, put it either on my own social media and say, hey, is anyone interested in this idea? Flick me a DM or let me know. The second part is that once I've done that, I'll create like literally a Google Slides. So if you're not used to this, you don't have a Gmail account, sign up for a Gmail account. And then this is basically the PowerPoint version of that. I'll write up what the product is going to be. And then I'll go down to a cafe and say, I'll buy you a free coffee and a muffin, and then show them the slide deck of what it is. And so that whole piece there is that like I'm trying to literally just get the whole product out in there in front of other people, because I'm going to find those objections. I'm going to get them really, really quickly. And usually when you're creating, you're in a silo as opposed to going out and chatting with other people. So for me, the piece is that if you're going to go out earlier, you're going to get customer feedback, but you just need to test your ideas with people who might be your potential customer first.
Gotcha. And kind of, as you say, as quickly as possible, getting that that feedback coming in, because otherwise, I guess the challenge is when you're doing the research side of things, you also, everyone can be guilty of this, and a lot of people try and keep it in check, but you're almost looking for validation for your idea. Whereas if you're in a conversation with someone, it's a lot harder to hide from objections as they come up. They're a lot kind of more in your face, right? And it allows you, and it switches the dialogue to, okay, well, what would be a solution that would get around that, or what would add value or whatnot. So, okay, so rapid validation. We've got a question very related to this from Steve, which is saying that there's this approach. What are your thoughts on the approach of something new that people don't necessarily know that they need? I guess you could almost think of like the Steve Jobs sort of analogy, right?
Yep.
Have you ever done that approach in your business, and what are your thoughts on that? Thank you for your question, Steve. Yeah,
so this is a tough one, is that it's you're going to get a lot of rejection usually from the market initially if you think the question, or if the product you're building may or may not be one that people need, right? And you won't find out until you get people using it whether or not it's something they need. So for us, what I'll always try and do is I'll find the most analogous thing that I can to it initially, in terms of, let's say if I'm building a new kicking tee. So there's a new kicking tee for rugby, right? I'll use the closest customers who look like that to put what would be a smoke test in front of them, which would be a landing page or concept around my idea. wait for what the initial feedback is, and then look whether or not I'm getting overwhelmingly negative stuff versus positive feedback. And so I go through, I build something and like using unbounce.com, which is just a free landing page tool that you can use and get a free trial of, put images of what the product is, and then find the closest competitor, what I think that space might be, and then pull and test that across. Because there's that super part where if you're creating something that people don't know they don't need, you're not going to find out if they actually need it until they use it. And so you could spend the whole time building it out, but you don't know until you still get in front of people. So that part around innovation and finding and putting that in front of them is still, you have to go through that testing phase, because otherwise you don't have users in the end.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So it still comes back to, you need to know if people are going to use it, right? And it's a very good question in the sense that absolutely there are products that get kind of pulled into the world through innovation that people don't know that they need, and then it's once it's out there, like, this is the best thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
Still not until you kind of can put that in front of people and start people understanding it, that you can kind of.
Yeah, and that's where you start, by getting the closest competitor to it, because there's still going to be a leaping gap where people don't quite get there to how to use it.
Yeah.
And you have a really difficult education process, and you might find out it turns people off way too soon, versus literally just getting them in and they're like, holy shit, why has no one ever thought of this before?
Yeah, absolutely. And you touch on another challenge as well, which is like from the education piece, is how can you have your communication as simple as possible so people actually get what you're trying to say and you don't kind of lose them on that journey. I guess that's another tough piece, but it kind of ties into everything. And also in regards to even telling the story of your startup or your business and getting your team on board through getting your customers on board, all of it, I guess, comes down to that simplicity piece. Steve, thank you for that question. And for anyone else that have questions, do fire them through and we'll continue to answer them. Right, Kale, nice segue actually. How do you choose where to spend your time relative to opportunities?
Yeah. This is a tough one, because like everything can be exciting initially when you first hear about it. So like I've got heaps of friends who've been like, bro, I'm starting this. And I'll be like, oh, work it. I would love to be involved. And then it's like, oh, do I actually have the ability to do it or work on that? So the way that I assess this is by two things. Firstly, if I'm going to be involved in something, do I have a way to leverage my own current network or leverage my own skill set to make this thing grow exponentially, right? So I'm looking at an opportunity. It's like, how much learning do I have to do versus what my current skill set is to make this grow really rapidly? And so that's how I look at it, is because I know if I'm going to invest an hour of my time onto this, will that result in a 10x ROI in terms of what it might buy me in terms of money, time, learnings, that sort of stuff. The other part is, how do I do this and opt in so I don't have too much downside or failures? So the key piece on that is, if I'm going to go into a new opportunity, how can I enter this so that I've got more wins that come out of it than failings? And the way that I look at that is, am I going in, and is this opportunity, one, going to either give me things that I care about that are personal to my life, learning, two, making me more money in terms of what the businesses that I care about, or three, the social impact stuff that I care about. If the business opportunities don't work in either of those two criteria, then like I'll take a pass on it. But the full point for this is, have a framework for what you know that you want to start with, and that like, I know that I'm good at digital marketing. I know that I'm pretty good in the health and fitness space, and I'm pretty good with starting and scaling great products. But I know I'm not great when it comes to, if like someone's looking for something around like, hey, we need you to really, really focus on just team management or fostering people or going down those roads. If the opportunity came to me in that capacity, I would opt out, because I know I don't have the network or the capacity to bring that up. And the other part is, I already know what I like. So if you don't know what you like, what your preference is for, it's very hard to then understand what you're doing. So for me, the things that I care about is like, I grew up in a low SES socioeconomic status, so single mum, or I really like the ability to do what I'm doing now, to give back to communities. I like the ability to leverage more money and make more money from the things that I can do. And then the last part is in here from that is, I want to learn new stuff. So it's got to be fascinating to me on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone just had a question on whether this is the course, Learn Digital Marketing course. Kale, you might be able to answer it just from the URL.
Yeah, I can see the URL. Yeah, it's if it's the 12 courses in one type thing, then that's the one you should pick up.
Cool. And after this, I'll circulate a whole lot of links after the fact to everyone as well. Okay, so I resonate with that because if you're working on stuff you genuinely care about, it doesn't feel like work in the same way. You want to invest your time into it because it's kind of like you're enjoying it, right? And when you're enjoying it and you spend more time in it, the better you get. And that becomes like this reinforcing loop where you're adding kind of more value, so you want to do it more. And rather than kind of going against, it's not like to your point before of like fostering a team or that side of things. It's not that you can't do it, of course you could, but it's kind of like that ROI of like if you're already kind of gravitating to a particular skill set and you're already really good at it, and that's where you want to kind of keep doubling down. You're continuing momentum on one of many things.
Yeah, and yes, I think that's that part is that I know now for me personally that a lot of my skill sets and strengths already lie there, right? So I know where my skill set is, and I'm basically, for me, the way that I do or run business is I'm trying to get and fill the holes in the areas that I'm weak with people that are world class in that. So for me, like looking after and supporting and raising staff, like the HR and the part of like the empathy and the things that go with that, I can do it, but it's a really bad ROI of my time as opposed to being like, hey, you're going to work on customer acquisition. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how would you reconcile that with the community where there might be some folk that are listening and they don't feel digital marketing would be their strength or something they gravitate towards, but it could also be a huge gap that they identify in an honest conversation that they've got room for improvement there, but they might not necessarily have a team of like pulling the world best in there at the moment. How would you? I know that's a loaded question, but like, what?
I'm on board.
Just kind of think through that for the community.
Yeah. The way I think about that is that like, do you have the money that can you afford to actually get someone in world class? No, then you're screwed. You've got to do it yourself, right? And so like initially, like for me, this whole time is that like I now can get in front of some really great human beings, right? I'm getting to like today, obviously, like I'm at the Ice House. I'm going to go meet their CEO and I'm going to go meet their head of growth. These people are like probably, they're high or above my level in terms of skill sets and what I am. So I can do that now, but it's because I've done groundwork from here that I couldn't afford to have done previously, right? Is that if I'm looking to hire somebody new, is if I don't have the money to do it, I just have to do that myself. And you're going to be like that for a very long time in terms of if you're just starting out from zero, it's like, okay, cool. This is what I think my product is. And then I now need to get people to buy it. What do I suck at the most or what's going to create the biggest ROI? Go and ask somebody first, like go talk to some other people, send them a message, talk to people who you think will be able to give that answer, and then go have a crack and do it yourself. You find out that doesn't work, cool. Tick it off the list, go try the next strategy. But essentially as you're doing this the first time around is that you're going to have to test a few things till you start getting wins. And then from there, it's like, okay, cool. As I get my first win and I've got a bit of spare cash, who do I get in who's better at this than me to then take care of it and scale it up?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So initially you might not be in a position to bring someone in, so that does force you to do it. But then you're just, I love that of, okay, who in your network or within your network's network can you connect with that has like those skill sets for sure, that you can kind of like accelerate your learning or your approaches. And then to the point, just still, you need to just roll up your sleeves and give it a nudge. I know like when I started, so I started an e-commerce store for selling Galaxy stuff into the States out of all things. So like I've got like a Galaxy earring here and I was selling like Galaxy duvets and like, you know how you're supposed to go super niche, right? I like space. I was like, Galaxy it is. And like when I first started, I spent so much time, I created like a Google Doc where I like started like just like reading all sorts of like different ways of approaching it and putting in one place, but it became like a beast in a bad way, where it was just like too much information, conflicting information, and like it was hard for me to really resonate with the points people were saying. Like, you know how like if you hear something versus you experience something, your learnings and takeaways are different.
Yes.
Right. And I got to the point where I just felt super overwhelmed. I hadn't actually really started at this point. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to give it a nudge. And I started, like, I pulled together a quick Shopify site and started doing like my first set of like Google ads and like just pushing it out there. And that's where I started getting the most learnings. And then when I then read articles, there were like gems that I get that I could directly correlate to what I was doing. And I had no background in the marketing side of things. And I guess what my takeaway from that, which I'm resonating with your point, is you just have to start. That's like,
And
Big
yeah, the piece of this too, and I'll direct people first, is that you want to do the thing, you need to just start, but you also need to do the thing that's just going to make you the most money first, right? So like if you think this tool is going to do it, like the reason we're in this and when you're starting out a business, like unless you're a social enterprise and you're doing it for sort of the change stuff, and even in that case, you need money to operate. Most businesses and startups fail because they run out of fucking money, right? So like the key piece in this whole thing is that you'll have to learn this until you make money from it. And then you can then have to push that to someone else who you can hire up or out to do it. And that key part of doing this though, is that as you get better, and the key thing you jumped on earlier, is you'll learn to ask better questions. So once you start, you'll be like, okay, cool. All right. Like you're going to jump on and have a chat with someone and say, hey, the analytics, I'm missing this part. And when I'm tracking this piece of traffic, it doesn't have this tag. What do you recommend to do that? That's a really better question as opposed to, hey, I don't know where my website traffic comes from.
Like, how do I improve my traffic? It's like there's so many ways you can approach it. Yeah. So get specific, but you can't get specific until you actually
do it. Yeah.
someone in your team's in the thick of it. That's cool, man. Sweet. And are there any other tools that you see as must-haves? I mean, there's quite a bit out there. What do you gravitate towards?
Yeah, the first one, and I try and make this checklist pretty basic, is Toggle. So that's the one that I think you dropped earlier, toggl.com. And that's just time tracking. So I start there because every day I need to know where I'm spending my time. If you don't know where you spend your time, then you're sort of screwed for terms of figuring out how to scale and hire on that other side of it. And you can't figure out an ROI for how you spend your time. The second one is Trello. We have a basic task management system, but it literally looks like, I'll see if we can share screen for one of our boards. Bring up the most recent one. It's a very, very basic setup where we have to do, doing, and then done. And that's like in the most basic form of it, in that you don't need to make all this stuff harder than what it is. So for us right now, I'll show you what this looks like. Let me know if you can share my screen, if you can see it.
Questions coming through, folk, as they come to mind.
Cool. So like for us, this is it: to do, doing, done. And you don't need to overcomplicate more than that. And once you're doing it, just put a note on there, and that's it. And so this is for our executive tasks. This is what me and John have to do. And then we've also got our director of client services on this. That's it. The due dates, and then you're away laughing, right? So that's how we do all of our task management in terms of what we're doing. And so if this is executive tasks, the next board's marketing. And so that's that key piece there. And then the third tool that I try and sort of use is called block site. So anyone who's got like a Chrome browser, I just block websites that I know I waste a shitload of time on.
Okay, so this is directly related to Toggle.
Yep. So it's just the way that I do that. And then anything else from when I'm doing all my task management is like, I'll use Google Calendar. And so I try and not use any of these other things else, like, and then my normal email. But everything is like, do you need to improve your productivity systems by adding X, Y, and Z? No. And then how does this work with when you go into your normal stuff? So this is how the time management piece works. And then I automate a lot of that stuff that comes in using Zapier. So Zapier.com is an automation tool. And then it feeds into Slack. And that's literally our whole set of what we use. So we use Toggle to track our time, Trello to do our tasks, Slack to communicate with our team. And then we also have the way that we have Trello set up is that we use Zapier to then, when our task is due, send a message to us in Slack. And that's like our stack set. But for most people, the key piece if you want to do this is that if you're doing a lot of manual labor with your tech tools or tech stack, or even just your like productivity tools and CMSs, figure out how you can use Zapier or other tools to automate that.
Yeah, cool. So what I'm kind of taking away from that is like, yes, absolutely, there are tools that will empower you that you should use. There might be different preferences people have for those tools, but regardless of tracking your time, project management system, a communication tool, and a bit of automation. But the other thing you said that I find super fascinating is be careful of like, kind of what I took from it is almost over optimizing your setup, right? Like I'm guilty of doing this in the past where like, I'll optimize my setup that might take me like 4 or 5 hours to find the right solution for a 5-minute job. It's like, no, like, and if you like, you've got Toggle going and you like catch yourself doing a couple of those things, it's a lot easier to kind of gravitate away and say, was that really the best use of my time, or like from an ROI perspective?
Yeah, and it's the other one. And I saw like, and this is a good point. Robertson, I think, just put a message. Trello is a direct integration in Slack. Why use Zapier? For specific tasks, when we're setting up certain things around sales KPIs, there's not the direct integration you need. So we'll use Zapier on some of those fronts for that. But it's also feeding for things like Google Calendar and that sort of stuff. But that's it. You can make this stuff and everyone can be like, oh, I want to be super, super productive. But if you've got a base piece of the tools, like you've got a good set, don't try and like continually optimize. Just sit with like a good starting point, understand where the return on your time is, and then go from there.
And if it becomes a problem because it's limited, then you can look to add in a solution, but don't do it beforehand. And it's the same trend that you're talking about with the product, right? Of like, come up with your MVP and start getting it in front of people, and then identify where the challenges are or what you're going to build next, opposed to prematurely building it and hoping that they'll come, or optimizing for edge. This is the other thing, optimizing for future education. Education. It's like, okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense, man. That's cool. And how do you choose what metrics to measure? This is I really like this question, because I've done this in the past and I see a lot of people doing it, but it's measuring vanity metrics.
Yeah.
How do you choose what to measure?
Yeah. And is this in a digital marketing sense, a life sense? Like, what things are we looking for between?
Well, I'd probably, open to community answering this too, but two things I'd say is, we've talked a lot about how you spend your time on what you're measuring there. If there's any piece on general kind of business practice, we've touched a lot on that. But I think also quite heavily on the digital marketing, like when someone's doing their first test campaigns that you mentioned before, like what's the really juicy stuff that people should be looking for and staying away from as well?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that people screw up initially is like when they start marketing campaigns, or people are just trying like that startup phase, people are usually not sure what a conversion is or what a win looks like. And so when I say that if you're starting out and you're reading a lot around digital marketing, and one of the things that gets out there is like build an email list, right? It's like, okay, cool, fantastic. You can build an email list. But for most people, they'll be like, all right, cool. I've got this really great piece of social content that went viral, but did it relate to the goal of getting email signups? No, then it's a shit piece of content. So like, you've got to really be careful around choosing your conversion from the starting point and actually setting that up as a goal inside of your analytics. And for people who don't know this, there's like a lot of analytics courses out there, but you can set goals based on how people hit URLs that then say, like if someone went to your website and they signed up for your email list and then they go to the URL of /thank you afterwards, that can be considered a conversion for an email sign up, right? Mm-hmm. But for the biggest part of this is that people will say, okay, cool. I might get a lot of vanity metrics, or I might do a lot of stuff of like a really high performing piece of content. But the piece of content that actually gets you more people to sign up to your mailing list is far better than the piece of content that gets 20,000 views and people are like, oh, it's great for my brand. Well, it's not great. It's great for your brand possibly, but it's not getting you money in the door. So that key part of setting up a conversion initially. And so that's what I look at is telling and asking people, what is the conversion metric for you? Like what looks like success in this campaign? And for the most part, for almost everybody, it should be sales. But if you're a brand new business and you're trying to get even people just to look at your product, then it might be email signups, or it might be like a subscription to your newsletter or certain things like your messenger bot, that sort of stuff. But that key piece is set up a conversion tactic that you need initially, which should be based around a sale on your website, or if it's like a longer sales funnel process, like a sign up, and then create backwards around that, because that's where people fuck up all the time, is that they'll go after like pretty metrics like, oh, I went high engagement, and then they'll explain backwards being like, oh, it was such a great post, we did this, and they talk retrospectively about not knowing what it was. And you'll hear them talk about this like it was a really great thing. In reality though, it's like, did you get the goal that you wanted? Well, no, it didn't get any sales. And it's like, it's not a great piece of content.
And people get just sucked into it, got so many reactions, likes, or whatever.
Exactly, right. And so it's the same thing. Like I've got an Instagram and I've got 6,500 followers, but like I was getting great content and engagement when I first started, but it still didn't help me with sales. Yeah. So like, I just stopped posting. There's just no need for me to carry on posting there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And something that on the surface sounds contrarian, but I think it's really not, is like we've talked a lot about kind of MVP of getting out there and just building it quickly based on what people need, rather than kind of building something amazing before you ship it, and then doing the same for your marketing. What I'd also tie that to is the longevity of sales is having a great product that once someone's got it, they become an advocate because they love what you're doing and your service, your product offering, and they end up selling it for you. You don't have to like build your brand of with no, like, I mean this with no disrespect to anyone, but rather than building a brand with no substance behind it because you haven't delivered yet, because you're trying to build your brand first, if you build your brand because also like when you do get these sales, like you deliver and you do a great job, people are going to talk about what you're doing, and the product and service almost sells itself. And the reason I say that sounds contrarian is because like, how do you kind of weigh that up against over here, you're kind of building it quickly, but they do match very well, because it's kind of like you're building it quickly because you're trying to get to the heart of where the value offer is and where you're adding the most value. And if you do it that way you can kind of like focus, if I'm hearing you correctly, cut me off if I'm not, but if you are pushing more towards kind of actually getting those key conversions that are then leading to your sales or your people using your product, they then become your champions and help push it out further, and you start to rally community behind it. Like, and I think your example of your gym, Central Fitness, was an amazing example of that, of kind of like getting people on board that then pushed it out further.
100%, bro. And that's it, because the sooner you get someone who's willing to pay for you something, that is your clearest signal that you've got something that's good. And that's the clearest part, is that someone recommends that I've done this value transaction, saying that I'm going to give you my money for the product that you're going to give me in exchange, right? And if your product's great, it's such an easy recommend or win for that other thing. And it comes back to building a great product first. And these tools on top of that are things to amplify that, but they're not a replacement.
Yeah. Well said. We've got a question from Ray in regards to, can you recommend a good place to learn about analytics? Would you say Udemy?
Udemy. I think there's hold on. I'll do it right now.
While you find that, Cal, I'll add a couple of pieces on there as well. Something also worth jumping into is Google Tag Manager. So the way kind of all these like tags work is like when you're putting in Google Analytics, or you're putting in Hotjar, which is like a screen tracking software, you put in Facebook Pixel for tracking Facebook activity, all that sort of stuff. The tags that you put in the website, but if you get Google Tag Manager, you can put them all in one place and it keeps it nice and clean. It's easy to kind of match them to goals and stuff. So Kale, just put that in, academy.com course, Google Analytics.
Yeah, Darragh Walsh, that guy's pretty good. Like, he's pretty sharp. He's got a cool voice too. I think he's Irish or Scottish.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. But that's such a great question, because like, if I think that's like one of the things I really like about digital marketing, among many things, is like you can track things on a level that like previously with marketing, it was kind of like you knew like some of your marketing was working, you just didn't know what half, right? Like,
well, you're just removing guesswork, right?
Whereas like with digital marketing, you can kind of like very clearly see ROI of, oh, interesting, I had huge assumptions that would do well and it didn't. Or this over here, I didn't have a lot of confidence in it and it boomed. And you kind of like really drill into it and doing all these. Oh, split testing. What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, I think there's a key part here, right? Because I've got to run, I've got a meeting in 2 minutes.
Okay.
So for the most part, for people here, I'm building a community with another guy, Rugby Bricks. It's called BrightFire. It's all free content. I think it's brightfire.co.nz. You can head over there. And a lot of the stuff here, I'm just literally fleshing out literal how-to articles of what you would do in there. So if there's pieces in that you have or you want to find useful, have a look at that. And then I'll take that last question from Jeremy. Do you use a VA or either a standalone integrated with Trello? Yep, I use a VA and I hire all of my virtual assistants. That's what Jeremy's asking. So a VA is virtual assistant. I hire all of mine from Upwork, and I make them send in a custom cover letter to weed out the crappy ones. So that's a quick hack on that front. But yes, I'm using VAs to optimize my time and get better on that.
That's cool, man. Just before we jump off, Kale, what are your next steps and some closing remarks to the community?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for everyone who tuned in. I appreciate you guys taking the time to actually listen and be here. It's still, I still get blown away when I see 20 to 30 people actually turning up to listen and see some of this stuff. It's really, really impressive. So kudos to people that stuck around and obviously learned some learnings on that. The key piece that if I was going to say for entrepreneurs, business people on this is that be consistent, consistently just show up and essentially you'll get results. And then once your results stop coming, ask people who are better than you or people in the position that you want to be to get better. That's been closely the largest part for me where I've gone to my success is that I've learned tried being consistent with my learning. Once I hit a wall, I've gone and found people who are smarter than me and then worked alongside them. So if there's a hack, that's probably the best one I can give you.
That's awesome, man. Kale, thank you so much for jumping on. Absolutely packed with value. Really enjoyed this conversation. All the best, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, bro. Great to see you.